Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Cold Case Christmas. In this episode, we're going to look at the unsolved murder of Amy Gellert. Amy was brutally and senselessly murdered on March 20th, 1994, after a masked intruder terrorised her mother and stepfather before she arrived home from church. Let's tell this story. March 20th proceeded like any other day, just a routine, normal Sunday for Bob and Bunny. They'd attended the evening service at Calvary Church on Merritt Island, Florida, as they did every Sunday. They were there with 21-year-old Amy. Amy had recently been gifted her mother's old vehicle and she wanted to drive herself to and from the church. So Bob and Bunny left before her. They left the church as soon as the service had ended. Amy remained behind. She operated the soundboard during the church services, so she stayed behind to make sure everything was put away and cleaned up. She told her parents she wouldn't be long and she'd see them back at the house. And no one could have anticipated what was waiting for Bob and Bunny at home. This was Cocoa Beach, Florida. Such brutal things don't happen here. But as they walked through the front door, they were startled to find a masked intruder brandishing both a dagger and a gun standing in their kitchen. The man immediately bound and gagged Bob and Bunny and ordered them to get on their knees and then crawl from the kitchen to the living room. They could do nothing but comply. Once the intruder had got them into the living room, he ordered them to lie down on the floor. And for the next 30 minutes, he did nothing really but terrorise them, just hold them hostage. He demanded cash, but robbery didn't seem to be his primary motive because Bunny was wearing several items of expensive jewellery and he didn't take that. He either didn't want it or just didn't see it. I don't know, but he didn't take that. They tried to engage him with conversation, trying to find out what he wanted. But he was just kind of pacing, walking around like, what was he doing? Was he waiting for Amy? Was Bunny and Bob's great fear. So about half an hour after this ordeal began, headlights flashed across the front of the house as Amy pulled up into the driveway. Her arrival appeared to agitate the intruder. As soon as he heard the car, something in him snapped. So was he waiting for Amy? Or is that completely wrong? He didn't know that someone else was going to arrive. This man could have been a complete stranger, could have been high on something and broke in and then not known what to do. But he became agitated and he snapped. And without warning, he attacked Bob and Bunny with the dagger. He stabbed Bob once in the head. And then he just stabbed Bunny numerous times in her neck and lower back. They were terrified. Bunny was struggling to survive. Bob, however, kept his wits about him. He staggered to his feet. He raced outside as well as he could with a stab wound to the head. And he yelled for Amy to run and get help. Unfortunately, the intruder was only a few steps behind him. He burst through the front door, past Bob, and immediately attacked Amy as she got out of her car. She was wearing a cloth bag, and she tried to kind of put that in front of her to shield herself. But the dagger just went straight through the bag. He stabbed her repeatedly in the head and neck. And then, just as suddenly as the attack had started, it was over. And he was gone. He raced down the street and he disappeared into the darkness, never to be seen again. Amy managed to stumble to the parking lot of a condominium complex where she pled with a woman to call for help. She was gasping for air. She told the woman she'd been stabbed, which was obvious because she was bleeding everywhere, and then she collapsed. Horrified, the woman tried to administer first aid and comfort Amy, but it was too late. She was gone. Police got to the scene within minutes. Bob and Bunny were rushed to a nearby hospital where they spent several weeks recovering from their wounds. They both survived, but utterly devastated that Amy lost her life. This was a needless, senseless attack. What did this masked intruder want? It didn't appear to have wanted anything in particular. The Brevard County Sheriff's Office was stunned by this. It was a quiet, upscale neighbourhood. Cocoa Beach, very low crime rate. They struggled to find a motive behind this vicious attack. There was no motive. What was it? Was he after Amy? Or was he irritated that she'd arrived home? Did he want money but didn't appear to want jewellery? It just seemed to be random. A random attack. Residents of Cocoa Beach were utterly horrified by the brutality of Amy's killing and the fact that Bob and Bunny, who were known to the neighbourhood, had been held hostage in their own home. The idea that there could be this dangerous killer on the loose shattered their entire community. Their illusion of safety was gone. And there was a lot of pressure on the sheriff's office to make an arrest. But they had little to go on. He'd been wearing a black ski mask over his face, so Bob and Bunny had no idea what he looked like. They'd been able to tell he was white, a white man, by the bit of skin that was visible just around the eye holes of his mask. A younger man, perhaps in his 20s, about 5'8", medium build, covered all in black, but with white shoes. He'd even been wearing gloves, so that he didn't leave any fingerprints behind. There was nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. Bunny recalled that he was quite softly spoken, and perhaps he had a northeastern accent, maybe Maryland, Pennsylvania, but they didn't recognise the voice. Quite frankly, it could have been any young man. But the fact that he spent 30 minutes plus, stabbed 3 people, and yet he left no fingerprints, no DNA. However, there was one thing that investigators did have. They discovered a magazine from the handgun. In his haste to escape, the murderer must not have realised that he dropped it. They determined that the magazine had come from a stage gun, a Brixia 9mm handgun used mainly in theatre productions. So although the man had brandished this gun as if it were real, it wasn't. It was a stage prop. It wasn't a real gun, but they didn't know that. But it was a relatively rare item, and investigators were hopeful that this one little piece of evidence that they had would lead to the killer. However, dead end. Local theatre companies came up empty. This could have been a stolen prop. There was nothing to link the theatre companies in the area with this killer. They made appeals to the public, but nothing. Now, they were able to get a little bit of DNA from the gun magazine, but that was checked against the database, CODIS. This was 1994, mind, and there was absolutely no guarantee that the DNA on the magazine was even the killer's. The killer seemed really careful not to leave fingerprints or DNA behind. So investigators felt it was actually really likely that this was just a stolen item that the killer had acquired somewhere, and the DNA on this magazine wasn't even the killer's. Shortly after the murder took place, a homeless man found several of Bunny's credit cards near Cape Canaveral Hospital in Cocoa Beach. He turned them in to a nearby bank, and the bank manager alerted the police. They were the credit cards that he'd stolen from the house. But by the time they got into police possession, any DNA or fingerprints were long spoiled. There was too much contamination on them to even begin to try to work out which was the killer's profile. When Bunny and Bob told detectives that the killer appeared to be waiting for someone, was it that he was waiting for Amy? And they thought not, because he was a stranger. This just seemed to be random. And what would he want with Amy? Just to stab her? Why? She had no enemies. Was he agitated because he was expecting someone else to come and give him a ride? Because he escaped on foot. So he didn't have his own vehicle. Well, maybe the getaway driver let him down, and that's why he was agitated. We'll never know, probably. Over the years, detectives have considered at least a dozen potential suspects, but eventually they're eliminated. By 2017, they had 2 men that they still considered to be viable suspects, but admit they'd no physical evidence to connect either of them to Amy's murder. The DNA found on that gun magazine didn't match the DNA of either of these men. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. So this senseless murder of 21-year-old Amy Gellert remains unsolved to this day. We may never know who took the life of Amy Gellert just on that normal March Sunday evening. But if you do have any information, Brevard County Sheriff's Office would love to hear from you. The number is 321 264 5201. Let me know what your thoughts are about this case in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode of Cold Case Christmas. Bye guys.